Since you have learned about cross-cultural dimensions, do you feel that your eyes are open now? Or do you feel that cross-cultural dimensions definitions are a bit limiting? Some of you may have the perception that finally now you understand something about cultural differences, their reasons, and how different cultural values can impact on preferred or not preferred teaching or learning styles. But others of you may think cross-cultural dimensions are stereotypes. By using them, I risk putting students, teachers, or anyone else with a diverse cultural background in boxes. Or I may not be able to consider the internal cultural variety that exists even within a single country or any territory. Or cross-cultural dimensions do not apply to many people that today have a multicultural identity because they have lived and spent time in several countries. To which country or culture do they belong to after they spend few years where they were born, other years somewhere else where their parents moved, other years where they wanted to move because of education or work reasons? What's the dominant or the preferred cultural orientation of this kind of people? This last is one of the problems I have with my own students. Indeed, I teach in a university's international course. At the age of 21, 22 years old, because the international mobility is part of the educational program, many have already lived in 2-3 countries. Plus, several of my students are children of expat families who, because of their parents' jobs, have moved and lived in different countries. When I present the cultural dimensions and the countries' comparison on the graduated scales to these kinds of students, they are the ones asking me, where am I supposed to fit? With my experiences in different countries and across various cultures, I have learned to be flexible and adjust depending on the context. Sometimes I react in a certain way and some other times in a different way. To some extent, this flexible adjustment or the ability to switch from one culturally preferred orientation to its opposite might happen not only to bicultural or multicultural people. These arguments are indeed some of the current scientific critics of the cross-cultural dimension approach. For instance, the one proposed by Geert Hofstede, von Trompenaars, and more recently by Richard Lewis and Erin Meyer. One of the most critiqued aspects of cross-cultural models is that the cultural orientations framework oversimplifies the concept of culture and overestimates the internal fixed status and homogeneity within a national group. The assumption about culture on which these models are based is a reified perspective or a cultural relatives perspective. To reify means to make an abstract idea or concept more concrete. The reified perspective considers culture as a property of people, groups, or organizations. Culture is a thing, a monolithic reality, something homogeneous, and in some way static or fixed. Indeed, according to this conception, groups have or belong to a specific culture. According to the reified concept of culture, cultural differences can be measured and compared on a graded scale along the lines of certain values and ethical dimensions. It doesn't matter if the ethical dimensions used to compare cultural diversity are not an emic concept, but they are somehow imposed from outside by someone external to the culture that is being described. Secondly, cross-cultural refers to a comparison process of some elements or dimensions considered existing to a certain degree in any culture. Culture is made up by traditions, norms, beliefs, values, common principles, and so on. It exists independently and outside the human mind, and homologates and separates culture's members. Consequently, people of a certain culture act accordingly in a stereotypical way. This assumption is based on a cultural positivism perspective, according to which culture exists independently or separate from the people that practice it. The risk is that these approaches will create stereotypes based on a scientific language, and some people, if they're not open enough, can take this knowledge for granted and use them as a filter or a guide to interact with others. And this is the contrary to using intercultural skills or taking an open approach to knowing others using human curiosity or taking an inquiring and empathetic approach through interaction. The cross-cultural dimension framework provides simple explanations of cultural differences and offer marketable solutions such as tests, training programs, and so on. However, the use of cross-cultural dimensions offer a starting point for understanding specific cultures and their related society, especially if we don't know anything about them. It can be a starting point to verify through direct experience and to keep suspended in our mind, knowing that we don't know about a certain culture and we need to learn. Through a direct experience, we could always be surprised by unexpected or by exceptional behaviors. A cross-cultural dimension framework can be used to understand certain culture-related sources of misunderstandings and to make behavioral adaptations to the target group. For example, when being inactive in class, Chinese students avoid losing face if they show that they don't know something. Highlights the need to change one's interpretative framework and to make behavioral adaptation to the target group. For instance, in order to facilitate Chinese students' active participation in class, it is better to use small group activities where groups are composed by 4 or 5 students instead of a large group or plenary interactions. Using a cross-cultural dimension framework has the undoubted advantage of reinforcing people's beliefs that it's possible to manage cultural differences and in turn reduce their anxiety and uncertainty in encountering a diverse culture. However, contemporary theories of culture and in the intercultural field argue against national identity, representing a culture, since culture, identity, national identity are complex, multi-phase constructs, and since one language or one nationality do not equal necessarily one culture. The word interculturalism, using the prefix inter instead of the prefix cross, emphasizes the idea of relationship, exchange, interdependency, and reciprocal influence. Dialogue among people with different cultural backgrounds creates links, connection, and consequently a possible dynamism or change in boundaries of the identities in relation. Through class interactions, explanations, explicit requests, and mutual understandings, teachers and students can mutually learn and adapt to each other by building a sort of third or new culture by integrating aspects of their different cultural habits or expectations.